So I'll discuss a little bit more how my grandpa kind of confused me, but also how I started to sort of more understand what he was teaching. So, like I said, he was a bad teacher. So a lot of what I'm telling you, his teaching is stuff that I just really figured out recently. And after reading Dr. Horace's books and after a lot of like studying and mulling over it, but he didn't teach me well. So like just one thing that he taught me though was like, and this was something that confused me was, I tried to explain to him the quadrant model, and I'm like, yes, if you look at reality, there's, everything is built around these relationships of the different quadrants. So like there's the four main world religions: Buddhism first quadrant, Christianity second quadrant, Islam third quadrant, and Hinduism fourth quadrant. And they have different qualities, and they fit the qualities of the four different quadrants. But my grandpa was like, I don't like so I was like, it's all about the relationships of the different quadrants. And my grandpa was like, I don't like the idea of relationships. Because, relationships, that implies duality, but everything is one, everything is energy. So I was like, no, dude, he didn't understand the quadrant model. He didn't understand that this existence is not just all an energy event. And he thought that, he didn't realize that there's a supernatural, like, quadrant, manifold, quadrant orientation, fourfold pattern that pervades and permeates reality. He just didn't get it. He didn't get that there is a like a magical supernatural quality to it. He was just like, he tried to make everything new age but very rational. Like it's all just energy, but there's the evolution. God is like the evolutionary aspect that's leading toward the kingdom of heaven, toward the next stage, what comes after life. But he didn't think that there was any patterns behind it, which there is. It's a quadrant pattern or anything like that. He was very much like tried to be very rationalistic and very naturalistic, but also new agey. So he kind of confused me, but like just a few more examples of what he was trying to teach. So like I said, I didn't quite understand what he meant, like why he was always like, so for instance, I remember when I was in Kauai in 2013, I told my grandpa, like, Noam Chomsky says that, language is innate, that, it's innate and it's like predetermined how our language is, and it's built around like some sort of, template. And but then my grandpa's like, I don't know about that. I doubt that. I don't know about that. But I'm like, dude, that's what he's a scientist. He's a big time scientist, and he says that. But my grandpa didn't like that idea because, again, my grandpa didn't like the idea that anything is innate or anything is genetic. I was trying to say that Noam Chomsky's idea was, language is genetic, it's innate. But my grandpa didn't like that idea because his whole thing was existentialism. You take responsibility for everything. And to say anything's like genetic or innate, then you can't take responsibility for it. Then you resign to it and be like, oh, well, I can't do anything about it. But that's the way things are. So I'm like, but at the time I didn't really understand what he was talking about. Like, what do you mean? Why are you against things being innate? But then when I started, in 2020, looking through Dr. Horace's books and studying existentialism, I started to realize, oh, you're not just an idiot. I just thought that my grandpa was an idiot. I was just like, why can't you accept that there's things that are genetic? Why can't you accept that there's things that are innate? Like, what the hell? Like, what's your are you retarded or something? Like, I didn't get it. But then when I was looking at Dr. Horace's books and I'm seeing existentialism, I'm like, oh, okay. He thinks, Dr. Horace took it to extreme, very new age, like you create everything. Very new age idea, like your thoughts create everything. But my grandpa tried to tone it down, but he was still very existentialism, new agey. But he's like, yes, everything's energy, and yes, you do affect reality. But the thing is, he's like, yes, it's best to take responsibility for everything. Because yes, let's say that there is, genetic component to, let's say, a sickness or cancer. Well, if you just resign to that, then you just resign to it. But if you don't, if you take responsibility, then you can do something about it. And he's like, in my opinion, it's due to energy. And if you upgrade your software and you're in the flow, then you can't get sick and stuff like that. But the way I looked at it, I was like, well, that's just victim blaming. You just, it's basically your philosophy of existentialism is a great way for great conservative philosophy to extol the victors and blame the victims, and I thought it was a white supremacist philosophy. And then, it was around this time that I started to kind of understand that. And here's another thing that my grandpa taught me around this time. This was like 2021. This is when he started teaching me again. But again, I describe he stopped teaching me after this because we got in an argument when my dad wouldn't see me again, and you know, my grandpa always took my dad's side, and he would stop teaching me, and he would stop talking to me, and he'd be like, and I felt like he was always trying to justify my dad not talking to me. And that's usually what our arguments were about, my dad not talking to me. But my grandpa didn't, he didn't understand that was a shoot away and messed up my shot. I was a great player. I was, you know, I played with the best players in the country. I was on the best teams in the country, played with Drew Holiday, you know, DeMar DeRozan, Brand James, all those guys. And people said I was better than Drew Holiday, all those guys. And I was, and I did things that none of them did. But it was a shoot away, messed up my shot. And my grandpa tried to make me blame myself, and he tried to do a right winger thing. Like, he tried to be like, yes, Ryan, you know, just take responsibility for your software. And what was your software? Why do you want to get videos of when you were younger? And he's like, what was your software? And I was like, and then when I wrote my based on true story books, I was like, well, it was probably because I had superior, inferior software. And I tried to blame myself. I tried to do my grandpa's thing of take responsibility. So like, I probably had superior, inferior software, and I wanted the videos so I could be superior. But really, you know, I wanted to fix my shot. I wanted to, figure out first off, I wanted to study swag flow, but I'm not going to get into that. But I wanted to fix my shot. And I know what happened. I'm not going to explain to people because I don't want to make good shooters think. But the shoot away messed up my shot because I'm picking the ball off of the rack, and I couldn't step into shots correctly because I'm picking the ball off the rack. And I'm not going to go into details, but then my dad tried to make me shoot sideways like I always shot, but then he would try to artificially make me do it, not realizing it was how I moved into shots, and picking the ball off the rack, you can't do that. It just deteriorated my game. So I would have been, but my grandpa thought, oh, well, no, the reason why you fought with your dad was because you're playing against bigger, better players, like victim blaming me. He was like, you were frustrated, so you took out your anger on your dad. No, that's not what happened. It was a shoot away machine. I wasn't playing against bigger, better players. And if it wasn't for the shoot away machine, none of this stuff would have happened. And he thought that I had software issues. Oh, well, it was because you had your will problems. You're trying to make things happen. No, it was a shoot away machine. If it wasn't for that, all that stuff wouldn't have happened. And, this is a tragic situation, But but my grandpa, the thing is he was trying to, like, I'll just try to go through some more of the stuff that he kind of taught me around this time that kind of confused me, but then was kind of making more sense to me until I started to figure it out. So, like, one thing he taught me was, I remember when I was in Washington, we watched T.D. Jakes. He's a black guy, and T.D. Jakes was talking about how, like, the people who suffer, he's like, it's often the people who suffer who are the greatest, Like, the people who suffer the most are the ones who get the farthest and they're the greatest. But my grandpa didn't like T.D. Jakes, and my grandpa told me that he thought that T.D. Jakes kind of sounded kind of arrogant, kind of self-confirmatory. But now I also understand the reason why I didn't like it was because T.D. Jakes is, and I think it's probably because he saw himself as black, he wanted, it was an ego thing, like he's trying to be like, the people who suffer the most, like the black people, that we're the superior ones, we're the chosen ones, right? And that's the way I wanted to see things when I was a leftist communist. Like, yeah, the proletariat, the people who suffer, the black people, the brown people, the Jewish people, the people who suffer, we're the most superior ones. We're because I wanted to mix the white people. And I want to be like, yeah, the people who suffer the most, they're the most superior ones. They're the greatest. They're the chosen ones. So it's an ego type of thing. And my grandpa was a fan of Nietzsche. And Nietzsche is kind of a part of existentialism. And Nietzsche talked about, like, the slave mentality. And he thought that Christianity was a slave mentality. But my grandpa was like, no, Christianity is not a slave mentality. Jesus didn't teach a slave mentality. Jesus taught the flow. But, people who adopted Christianity, they thought they incorporated the slave mentality. But my grandpa was like, yeah, the slave mentality, that's self-confirmatory. Like, oh, I'm suffering, so I'm superior. Oh, I'm inferior, so I'm superior. So again, I saw this as kind of like a right-wing white supremacist way of looking at things. Like, my grandpa adopted it. I thought that my grandpa adopted it because it was like, yes, I'm not going to adopt the leftist communist, like, oh, the poor, the suffering people are the best. No, a lot of, the poor and suffering is self-confirmatory, and a lot of it's brought upon by themselves by not being in the flow. And, my grandpa took on kind of more of a right-wing way of looking at it, like the Nietzsche and Ayn Rand and stuff. Like, the people who are successful, don't try to put them down, But again, my grandpa would say that, like Kanye West, Kanye West is like, yeah, I'm the man, I'm superior. But my grandpa would be like, but he would kind of like tone it down a little bit. My grandpa would be like, well, Kanye West, he's exhibiting dualistic software by saying he's superior and stuff and arrogance. But, he's not necessarily in the flow. In the flow, you just go all out and you don't take credit. You just work hard, but you don't take personal credit. You know, you just go all out because if you think you're superior, then you're not going to work so hard, maybe, you know. But you just go all out and you just try work to excel. You're not working to be the best because that's dualistic software. You think there's a self and other and that you're trying to compete with others. No, you're just working to excel, to, you know, to be the best that you can be, but just to excel and to be in the flow, you know. But, you know, so my grandpa kind of like, and I remember when I watched the movie, The Fiddler on the Roof, my grandpa was like, you know, he didn't like the woman in The Fiddler on the Roof was like, oh, so we suffer. And my grandpa was like, yeah, you know, that's a big part of Jewish religion, he thought, and the idea like, oh, because we suffer, we're superior. And like he thought it was a sentimentalism and a self-confirmatory, like, oh, because I'm inferior, I'm superior. And I kind of wanted to see it that way when I was a communist leftist. Like, yes, the people who suffer, my grandpa would admit, you know, sometimes it can push people to excel and stuff like that. But at the same time, he would say, not necessarily, though. And sometimes people who suffer bring it upon themselves for various reasons. And it could be due to self-confirmatory consciousness or dualistic primitive consciousness that people suffer and not being in the flow. So again, I thought that my grandpa was a victim blamer, and he is kind of a victim blamer in that sense. But again, also, like, now I kind of understand, like, it is true. Sometimes victims are to blame in ways, you know? But, you know, but my grandpa would say, I don't blame the victim, I blame the software. It's not the person. There is no person. And that's another one of my grandpa's teachings. He'd be like, you don't want to be a good person. You want to be a beneficial presence. You don't want to be a beneficial person, but a beneficial presence. Because my grandpa would be like, you know, people try to be good people, and that's rational dualistic consciousness. Like, oh, I'm going to give and I'm going to be a good person. But my grandpa, again, he'd be like, well, you could give and you can actually hurt the person by giving. You know, because it might enable him, or you, for instance, like George Soros might be giving to black people in order to defeat white people, but then that might end up hurting people, right? So, you know, my grandpa would be like, being a good person is not necessarily good. People try to be good persons, but being a beneficial presence is when you're in the flow and you transcend the illusion that you're a separate person and you're in oneness consciousness, and then you can get inspiration, and then you can be a beneficial presence, you know? So I understand that now, but at the time I didn't understand it. But so at this time is when I started to kind of understand my grandpa's teachings, but this is like 2021, but I was still confused. But another example of a teaching that my grandpa had was, what was it? What was I going to talk about? Well, yeah, here's another thing, but I'll get more into the other stuff. But like, I always thought that my grandpa was anti-religion because like my grandpa would watch the videos of the Christian evangelists and stuff, and they would be like cheering and doing their like singing and stuff. And sometimes my grandpa said the music was meditative and beneficial, but and he like admired it. But a lot of times he would say it was self-confirmatory and emotionalism. And emotion is self-confirmatory because it brings your consciousness on the self. So I thought that my grandpa was kind of anti-religion, anti-Christian, and I liked that when I was a leftist communist. I was like, yeah, be anti-Christian, anti-religion, and because I wanted to destroy Christianity because I saw it as white supremacist, and I thought that it helped the white people. But and I saw myself as Jewish, you know. But here's the other thing though. Like I remember one time my grandpa was saying like the Amish, like he watched a show on the Amish and he was like looking down upon the Amish, it looked like. But my grandpa was saying like, yeah, well, you know, when you step out of the Amish stuff, then you could be a part of, you know, working to grow and expand your awareness and stuff rather than just be circumscribed in the Amish community and stuff. But so I thought that my grandpa was kind of anti-religion, you know, so I was kind of confused. And even my grandpa said that he thought that religion was kind of a delusion, like Freud said. So I thought, oh, okay, my grandpa's kind of Freudian. I was like, okay, my grandpa's kind of Freudian. And I was always Freudian because I liked Freud because he was anti-Christian and I was anti-Christian, anti-white, and I wanted to destroy white people. And I thought that Christianity was white supremacist, and I thought religion in general was white supremacist. It maintained division, it maintained the white race. So I liked Freud, you know, and I liked Marxism and stuff, but that was anti-religion. But then this is the thing that kind of confused me was, okay, so, but then one time this is probably in 2021 when my grandpa started teaching me again, but then again, remember, he stopped teaching me again, but, you know, I asked my grandpa, like, I told my grandpa about a story about a rabbi who told a joke, and he said that in this joke there was a boy who, or so somebody, there was a boy who was acting crazy on the plane, and then there was who was like a secular kid, and then the parents of the secular kid asked the Jewish rabbi. She was like, "How come your children act so good, but this, our secular kid doesn't?" And the rabbi said, "Well, because we teach that we come that are that we come from Moses, whereas you guys teach that you come from monkeys." And I asked my grandpa, "What do you think about that?" My grandpa said he liked it, but I was like, "What?" Because I was like, "I always thought you were anti-religion, Grandpa," because he made fun of the Christians and stuff, like the emotionalism of like Jimmy Swaggart type of stuff. Like he made fun of that, but and now I understand that it's because it's emotionalism and that could cause attention to the body. But my grandpa would talk about transcending the body to inspiration. But at the time, I didn't understand it. I thought my grandpa was just anti-religion. But my grandpa's like, "Well, yeah, we're not animals, So I was like, and then I was like, "What? So you like what the rabbi was saying that we're, that we come from Moses? Like that seems to be pro-religion, So I'm a little bit confused. But then I also read to my grandpa this thing by this guy, I forget his name. And it was Schumacher, and Schumacher was saying that, that there's 4 levels of being. And he said that the first one's a mineral, then there's the plant, then there's the animal, and then there's a human, the 4th level. And the human was rational. And again, I thought that this was kind of like religious a little bit. And I like the idea of the 4 levels, but, I was like, we are kind of animals. I wanted to see humans as kind of like animals, And I wanted to see religion as just an outgrowth of Darwinism, just a way to maintain genetic groups by separating through different religions, and the religions help to maintain the tribes by making rules that help the genes of the tribes, like do not kill, do not steal, which maintains order, which helps the genes of the tribes. I just want to see it as humans as just a kind of animal. But my grandpa was like, "No, I like what Schumacher's saying." He said we're not animals, we don't, it's best to look at it that way. And I was like, "What?" Because I thought that my grandpa was always anti-religion because he made fun of the religious stuff, but now I understand what he's saying. It was a part of his existentialism, like kind of right-wing existentialism, but kind of like a take responsibility thing. Like, so now I know my grandpa would be like, "Well, yeah, because if you see yourself as an animal and genetic Darwinism, then you can resign to that and you can make excuses. And then you can make excuses for existentially invalid behaviors that are not, in the flow or that are self-confirmatory, or like having promiscuous sex, or killing or stealing and stuff like that." But my grandpa would be like, "But if you see yourself as like, coming from Moses, transpersonal consciousness as like an energy event or whatever, then you don't follow those excuses. You see yourself as one with everything." And so, and even my grandpa talked about like he didn't like the idea of original sin, because my grandpa's like, "No, I don't necessarily agree with that, because if you believe in original sin and that we're inherently evil, then you might find that use that as an excuse to act evil." But my grandpa's like, "No, look at yourself as like an energy event and one with everything." And so I started to kind of understand what he was saying, and I started to kind of understand it, but I was still a little confused. So this is when I was like shifting from being like a leftist to kind of like being a little confused. Like, should I be a leftist? Should I be right wing? And again, my grandpa's big teaching was like, so when I was a leftist communist in 2020, I was teaching like, everybody's one, and but we should, you should treat people as individuals. Because again, I wanted race mixing. And I wanted to be like, yes, there's black people with low IQs, that's true, but there's also white people with low IQs, but there's black people with high IQs, and there's white people. The bell curves of the black race and the white race, they overlap. So yes, there's a lot of black people who have as high IQs as high as a lot of white people. So to say that all white people are smarter is inaccurate. Don't make generalizations, So I wanted to race mix and say like, it's a social construction, but I asked so I had an ego agenda. I had a predator-prey agenda, but I asked my grandpa what he thought about that. And my grandpa's like, "Yeah, regardless, it doesn't matter." My grandpa would just be like, "All that matters is just go all out, don't make excuses. Oh, because I have a low IQ, I'm going to act like this, or oh, because I have a high IQ." Because my grandpa would be like, if you have a high IQ and you're arrogant, then you might not work as hard, right? Don't make excuses, and don't like, that's self-confirmatory. Just regardless, just wherever you're at, just go all out, just work to excel. And that's his, like, then you're more in the flow, So, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because I think that sometimes there's a lot, that's a nice sounding thing. But again, there's no formula for the flow, as my grandpa would say. There's no formula for the flow. And, you know, but regardless, so I started to kind of get an understanding of what my grandpa was teaching, and it kind of like made me falter like between right wing and left wing. And I'm thinking like, I don't know what my grandpa is, but I'm starting to get a deeper understanding. But this was like 2021, but I was still a left wing. I was still a left winger, but I was starting to understand it. But then, as I said, I went to visit my grandpa in Washington, and my dad was hiding from me as my grandma was dying. I went up to visit, and my dad wouldn't even see me. My dad was hiding, and I got in an argument with my grandpa, and I just want to talk to my dad, and I want to talk to my mom and dad, and I want to just normal relationship. But my grandpa, again, he looked down upon me. He didn't understand the quadrant model. He didn't believe in and like I said, it's just a weird situation. And again, like my grandpa was like, I feel like he blamed my grandma for her cancer because he thought that people bring it upon themselves and stuff. But regardless, I don't remember why the argument happened exactly. But afterwards, my grandpa was like, the only reason why I was teaching you was because your grandma was making me, but no, I'm not going to teach you anymore. And that, I thought that was ironic because he's always talking about like, you can't influence people, you can't make things happen. But my grandma was making him teach me, and that was helping me, but so I was just, then I was just like distraught because I wanted to learn more. I wanted to understand what the flow was, and he hadn't really taught me yet. At that time, I didn't understand the flow. At that time, he hadn't really taught me well. So I didn't now I understand it. And what I'm saying now is what I understand now. And I can look back upon that time and understand what he's trying to say. But at the time, I didn't understand the flow. So this is about like 2021. But like I said, about that time was when my grandpa stopped teaching me. So I was on my own again, alone in my apartment in Los Angeles. But I started studying a lot of Hinduism, and I started studying a lot of Greek mythology. And I'll get to what happens next in the story.